Namaste and good evening to all from India. This is Abhivadan from Industing, and we have a very exciting banger of an episode today for Industing, season two, because I have two interesting guests to bear. One I'm going to talk to Richard, and then I have at 7 p.m. with Alexei. So we are going to discuss the Russia-Ukraine crisis a little bit, but the purpose of the discussion should not be, just eaten up by Russia, Zelensky, and NATO. So we are not limiting the discussion to that, and therefore we'll discuss about a new conception and a new development which has come up in the Indo-Pacific and the Mediterranean Arab part of the world, which is the pentagram. And we will also discuss Richard's thoughts on dharmic Marxism or dharmic socialism. As we know, we have had the first episode of In This Thing in which we had discussed with Alexei about this. Apart from which, I'll try to discuss certain aspects about how is India trying to shape its own Indo-Pacific approach now, because a lot has changed. The Munich Security Conference, if we see the statements of Dr. Jaishankar, they are just amazing, and they are very interesting to look at, that even an Anglophile or a US loving prime minister or a US loving external affairs minister has to take a strategic stand, which makes sense. So I'm seeing strategic hedging plus volunteer alignment here, but I mean, if I discuss everything right now, isn't it the end? So let's begin. So, Richard, what is the pentagram? We had discussed about the pentagram. You told me about the 5 countries, and I know that we had discussed this in a joking fashion, and I got fascinated simply because of its nature per se. But what is the pentagram? How would you construct itself? Yeah.
So the pentagram, as you remember, was just a humorous term that that I developed a few months ago after France had the huge falling out with Australia over the nuclear. Well, no, not nuclear submarines. So they had a deal for selling diesel-powered submarines to Australia, despite France being a specialist in nuclear-powered submarines, and then Australia cancel the deal so that they could buy nuclear powered submarines from the US. Ever since then, France has diminished its enthusiasm for working together with the Anglosphere, and meanwhile, the Australians got into bed deeper with the US and UK to make AUKUS, their new Indo-Pacific coalition or alliance, which exists in parallel with this much hyped concept of the Quad, which is Australia, the US, Japan, and India, which is also supposedly operating in the same space. But you can see that the three Anglo countries are much more comfortable playing together through AUKUS than with the Quad or than with France, even though France has extensive overseas territories in the Pacific and historically had a maritime footprint and a colonial footprint in the Indian Ocean as well. So, in response to that, we've seen President Macron look for new partners and build alternative alliances which don't involve the US and UK, who they see as spoilers, they see as disrespectful, who go behind their backs and sabotage a lot of patient French diplomacy. And as part of that, so as opposed to the Quad, which has 4 members, one has noticed that there's this attempt at making a 5 member coalition by France, which is France, Greece, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and India. Now, this is a very eclectic group who otherwise would probably have not teamed up together in this multilateral fashion, perhaps bilaterally. Bilaterally, of course, India signed a big agreement with the Emirates earlier this week, and we have defense deals with France. We're deepening cooperation with Greece, and there's an interconnection across all of these, which is that France has supplied its Rafale fighter jet to all of them. And the French military industrial complex is very close to their domestic politics, because the state directs a lot of a lot of the economy in France. It has a very high rate of public spending. It has the highest contribution of the state sector to the GDP in the developed world, I believe. And the success or failure of their defense industry depends on the success or failure of French diplomacy in selling these, finding markets for them abroad. So, as part of this export promotion strategy from France and selling the Rafales, they also bring the customers of the Rafale into this little umbrella of cooperation. And if you look at the pattern of the countries that are being involved, uh, and that's so France, Greece, Egypt, the Emirates, and India. What what could they possibly have in common apart from the Rafale? The other thing they have in common is that they all have been targeted by Turkey under Erdogan. So, Turkey in the past few years has teamed up with Qatar to give shelter to the Muslim Brotherhood, who had revived in their traditional homeland of Egypt during the Arab Spring. But now, with the new ruling dispensation in Egypt, there's been a crackdown once again on Islamist extremism, and that has led them to look for new patrons, and that has been Qatar, Turkey, and to a lesser extent Malaysia. But Zakir Naik's patrons there, yeah, it's believable. And with that in mind, these countries are embracing unorthodox ways to contain the threat of Turkish intelligence, hostile actions, of Turkish border aggression. For example, Greece finds its borders constantly violated by the Turkish Air Force. And there's not much they can do about it because both Greece and Turkey are NATO member states. Article 5 of NATO says aggression against one member is aggression against all, but how are you going to enforce that when it's two member states who constantly get into skirmishes? There are also other countries that have an interest in this, and that's Cyprus, Armenia, both motivated by their past of facing Turkish aggression, and then Saudi Arabia, who have for a long time positioned themselves as the leaders of the Islamic world and as the preeminent power in the Gulf or in West Asia. And they don't look kindly upon both their historical rival in Iran, uh, the Shia power in the region, but also the non-Arab power in the region, but also now against Qatar, who are using their gas money to push their own version of political Islam, which is happening just as Saudi is moving away from very orthodox Wahhabism under Mohammed bin Salman. So there's a range of processes happening in parallel, new rivalries being formed, and then new unconventional partnerships and coalitions coming up to tackle them. And so that is what I humorously call the pentagram, or the unholy alliance. Pentagram, because there's five members, and also because the pentagram is associated with devil worship. So this is basically heresy. That countries like this, what do Greece, Egypt, the Emirates, Saudi, India, Armenia have in common? They have very little in common. So they're brought together by shared interests, and it's very, very surprising for many people.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of Minister Jaishankar saying in, I think, Munich Security Conference, and this, I think I want to correlate it with, because I have a question of this, a very quick question. So Minister Jaishankar says, "Oh, the Quad is not an Asian NATO, even in a lexical sense." He very openly says that to the moderator as well as the audience. Also, the one thing which is India's consideration is that, as you say, that it's an alliance of quote unquote alliance of shared interest. I'm not saying it's an alliance yet, because it's not like an alliance properly in that international legal sense. It does not have a secretariat. It doesn't have anything like that. But in a general sense, I think, uh, as what the minister says, it's a 21st century way to deal with 21st century problems. So let me compare it with, because I have a very weird understanding of this and I just want to share it for fun. So I think uh, the fault lines of the quadrilateral, as we say, because it's not no more the quadrilateral security dialogue, we know that. It has gone to critical tech. I mean, it has also gone to COVAX, such a funny initiative where India, in the name of Vande Bharat, sorry, Vande Bharat, if I'm right, Vaccine Maitri, sorry, not Vande Bharat, Vaccine Maitri gave away its vaccines to people in the name of humanitarian affairs, which is a good thing to do. But the Quad members are claiming, "Arey nahi, hum logon ne kiya hai," which is the funniest thing I've ever heard. And we had discussed this in my panel also, that this is the irony of the Quad, that it is very inconsistent in creating. Of course, we know the Anglophile bias, but beyond that, of course, the problem with the Quad is that while I see that the trilateral might work without the US, that's a different issue because that has an own strategic value. This Quad might not work simply because we all know that the DC think tankers are thinking, "Arey nahi, isko militarize to karenge because something will happen to Taiwan." But
Mhm.
is India even thinking about that or not? We don't know. Because larger concerns are the territorial issue and the naval issue. And that is where India needs to be a maritime power. Even the Quad members agreed. So I think because of the fault lines of the Quad, despite the fact that the media reports that the Quad summit really went well, India made it clear, that, the Ukraine issue is not a part of our geography. And on Myanmar, no, we do not consider sanctions as a method,
Mhm.
despite the fact that Jaishankar says that he recognizes. So, how do you see this? I think the exaggeration of the Quad, howsoever, and because it will exist anyways as an irrelevant or irrelevant initiative, it depends. You can give your 2 cents on that, but is it that is exacerbating the role of the so-called pentagram? Because I think it might become possible. Because that reminds me of that map I had seen and I had commented on social media, which was regarding that whole Mediterranean and Arabic region, sea wise. So, how do you
Mhm.
see it?
Well, I think at the moment, the only real benefit India gets by being part of the Quad is that at least Australia, Japan, and the US are not completely hostile to India's naval or maritime ambitions over the, let's say, short term to medium term future in the region. And Indo-Pacific meaning the Indian Ocean region and the Pacific Ocean region. It doesn't mean India has any claim to the Pacific or that India has supplanted the old term of Asia Pacific. So yeah, it's good that at least they think that we're not completely opposed to them. Because we don't need to be squeezed both by the West and China on something that's just important for our economic and trade future. That the Indian Ocean region and what connects it to the Pacific Ocean, so that's Southeast Asia as it's called, are historically the naval and maritime domains of the Indosphere. And part of our economic growth story and civilizational rebirth over the next few decades should be to reconnect with these countries and with these regions economically, culturally, politically, and militarily. They also share a healthy paranoia of the People's Republic of China. Many of them have had negative experiences, be it Vietnam, be it Cambodia, uh, and as a result, India is seen still as a benign power, but a soft and poor nation, and that's something that has to be addressed. That I remember a conversation with Dr. Jaishankar and a Minister of Foreign Affairs in Southeast Asia. Where his counterpart had said that, oh, India is like our mother country. It gave us our language, it gave us our religion, it gave us our culture, but
Was it
China is
Bangladesh?
no, no, not
Bangladesh.
Bangladesh. No, no, no. It's,
Okay.
Southeast Asia, so in the Mekong Delta. So yeah, India is like our mother country. Gave us, our language, our culture, our religion. But China is like our father because he gives us pocket money. Now, uh, at some point, we have to learn to play the game. We can't just rest on, oh yes, the old Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms of Cambodia and Champa and Amravati in Southeast Asia, but leverage something that has tangible benefits today. That they should see that trade with India or infrastructural development from India is in their benefit and in mutual benefit. So this is what Indo-Pacific should really mean for India, and that if it means membership of the Quad helps at least ease some of the pressure that, oh, now Australia and Japan and the US think, okay, they're not encroaching on our territory, they're not going to go on some quest to reconquer Cambodia and declare it overseas territory of India like the Chola times. Yeah, okay, good. But beyond that, we're not really using the Quad as a vehicle for our let's say defense insecurities against the People's Republic. The Quad doesn't talk about Chinese incursions in Arunachal Pradesh or in the Union Territory of Ladakh, or occupation of Aksai Chin, or even our protectorate of Bhutan. So that's something that, if we really wanted, we could use the Quad for that. But at the moment, the Quad is more interested in, as you mentioned, Taiwan. When they say, oh, maritime security and shipping routes, they want the shipping routes controlled by the US to stay in their hands. And part of that is maintaining the status quo of the region. So they don't want a revisionist power like China coming and changing the way things are. And as you mentioned, Taiwan, uh, having seen the way the US ran away from Afghanistan in September, having seen them responding to Russian intervention in eastern Ukraine by posting dank memes from the U.S. embassy in Kiev, which is not even in Kiev anymore. The U.S. embassy evacuated its diplomats. They're in a hotel in Poland, and then on the day that the Russian peacekeepers entered Lugansk and Donetsk, what are they posting? They're posting dank memes that, oh, Kiev in 1044 AD had a church, Kiev in 1280 had a cathedral, and Moscow had a swamp and some trees. Uh, that's completely bizarre. And so, with this in mind, uh, China can see that, and they know that in various military simulations that the U.S. Navy and Air Force and Army have done, there is no circumstance in which they can successfully defend Taiwan. Taiwan can put up a defense of maybe 72 hours on its own, and the US is not going to risk a war. It's not going to send its own troops to fight a nuclear armed power. It's not going to send its own youth to die. There's no oil in Taiwan. Uh, that's one thing, that it's worth killing your younger generations for, as they showed in Iraq. But there's no oil in Taiwan. The best they'll do is post dank memes and put sanctions on a few people. So that's the message that they've been given. They've just been advertising their weakness throughout. So then, yes, doesn't matter if you have the Quad, you're not going to use it in a way that actually achieves any deterrence. Now, the only other way they could do that is if they went and put missiles, nuclear missiles in Taiwan, but that would just accelerate the inevitable invasion anyway. You don't want to have another Cuban Missile Crisis. So yeah, that's the state of play these days in that region.
Yeah. So I'll just to add, and then we'll go to the correlation on how Europe, US, and Russia, the triangle of whatever they're doing right now, is actually affecting India and China in that sense. So I'll get on that, but just to add something for fun,
Mm-hmm.
like when I saw that meme by the Ukraine account on Twitter, I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was just like, are you really dehumanizing yourself or what? That's
Oh,
the only answer I had, and
the one with
ironically,
Hitler patting Putin on the head. Yes,
yeah,
very
and
bizarre.
then that shameless response that this is not a meme, this is ours and yours reality. I mean, shame on you, and you just can't even handle your country. That's why I remember a journalist saying that the CIA basically had a coup in Ukraine, and the Russians are completing that as a response, whatever it is. I don't justify anything, but as a as a person who I really admire, John H. Mearsheimer, he rightly says that it is power politics. You can't expect oranges and apples from Russia. You will expect that. The same is for China. If someday China tries to hack Japanese tech ecosystem, it is cyber warfare. It is digital warfare. What can you do about it? The same I can say for AWS. If Amazon Web Services says, oh, you know what, we are tired of Indian actors, we'll just say purge the AWS services. All the startups in India, the big startups which have got IPO, Zomato, etc., they band ho jaye. Kya kar loge? So this is technical warfare. You can weaponize soft power. It is inevitable to do so. Hard power can engulf soft power. That is how the beast is. But sadly, it is that, I mean, I was really shocked at this because I'll tell you, I saw this video by Elizabeth Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary, and I was like, she is just merely commercializing her whole secretive engagement, whatever it is, on Ukraine, Russia, as if it's some public TV ad by the BBC. So it's like literally that Mr. Prime Minister Humphrey Appleby moment. And I found it so funny. How do people even go to that level? It's not about Zelensky because I understand how incompetent he is. I mean, you can't even defend your country properly. You went for a policy which doesn't make sense. Anyways, so one update I've got on NATO, that the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe has actually got extraordinary powers from Europe, sorry, NATO, to basically have 5 NATO defense plans. So I know that Biden has sent certain, and this is just a small follow up. You can just respond in quick so that I can ask the next question on India. So he has already ordered to send troops in certain Eastern European countries which are already a part of NATO, such as Macedonia and others. So I can guess, I can't assure because I'm not in Russia. I can only guess that the Russians will not go ahead because Ukraine is also already the concern. President Putin's speech proves it. In fact, even the recent statement by Putin on NATO clearly proves that we are not going to the other countries. They are not our concern. Ukraine is our concern. How do you see that? Do you see the response of some value, or do you see that it's just intangible? It's just rhetoric, just to create I would say the smog of deterrence. How do you see it? Just quick. Yeah.
So I believe that at a popular level, people are not willing to send their troops or to send their sons within member states to go defend a country that's not a part of of NATO and is not a part of the EU and has historically been seen. And this is, it's a subtle form of Occidental, Western. Let's say supremacy or racism, that they don't consider Eastern European countries fully European. They barely consider Southern European countries fully European. And historically, Europe is a social construct. There's no fixed beginning or end of where Europe is because it's one continent with Asia, it's Eurasia. So traditionally, Europe was wherever Westerners said it began or ended. And that was, are you Western enough? Are you Christian enough? Are you modern enough? Now, are you democratic enough? Now, Ukraine has traditionally been seen, and I remember even 10, 12 years ago when they talked about the expansion of the EU, expansion of NATO to the east, they said that Ukraine is too poor, Belarus is too scary, Russia is too big. These are countries that have zero hope of integration into the EU, and the best that Ukraine can hope for is a simplified visa regime that helps accelerate brain drain. That's what Ukraine will, under the post Maidan administration, has been reduced to. That it has experienced massive brain drain. A lot of people have moved to the West, even to Poland, where salaries are not very high, but it's still seen as more stable existence than in Ukraine, having experienced the loss of, let's say, socioeconomic stability that had existed in the 90s and 2000s until 2014. So I think it's quite unlikely that we'll see NATO troops facing off with Russian troops. And as you said, that uh, Russia has made it clear that they don't have any ambitions beyond Ukraine. And that's something that most countries will find comforting. They'll say, oh, then we can make a compromise as long as they don't come to our house. Of course, there are some countries within NATO, within the EU, like Poland or Lithuania, who have a very high skepticism of Russia's uh, let's say ambitions or intentions, and they are the most keen on supporting Ukraine for historical reasons. But just because Poland wants something or just because Lithuania wants something doesn't mean that the Portuguese army or Irish youngsters or Dutch youth are going to go and fight in Ukraine. It doesn't seem realistic. And even if they did, let's say there is a scenario where NATO deploys its troops, and confronts Russian troops in Ukraine. Uh, if things go wrong, these are open democracies in Europe. There will be a huge public outcry. Why are our troops dying? Why are they being humiliated on TV? There'll be an information war. Russia has already shown that it's willing to absorb temporary pain to achieve geopolitical objectives. It's willing to absorb sanctions. It's willing to absorb casualties. Has NATO shown that? No, they've only shown that when it meant going to Iraq or Afghanistan. And the other thing is, so NATO doesn't like sending ground troops anymore. From what they did in Libya or Syria, is that they find moderate rebels, arm them, and then provide air support. Now, providing air support, uh, you know, in Libya or Syria is one thing, but NATO air forces, if used against Russia, would face some of the most sophisticated anti-air artillery in the world, and would very quickly be neutralized. And then they would be forced. So now we've overcommitted. Now, are we going to send ground troops or not? Because there are no moderate rebels. Well, there are some moderate rebels in Ukraine. They're neo Nazis and volunteers, a ragtag bunch of volunteers from around the world. Yeah, what are you going to do? You're going to create Ukrainian ISIS and hope for the best, and hope that they don't, get driven more to the west by Russian troops, and then end up doing it in Poland instead.
I don't think that that's going to happen. So let's wish for the best. But yeah, I think just one funny update, two funny updates. The U.S. Embassy in so-called Kiev has already stated that it's not going to, even attempt to evacuate its own U.S. citizens, which is another funny update. Number two, I think what I've heard as of now is that Russians have already captured the Ukrainian city of Kostomel, which is according to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry. So, I mean, they're so near to Kiev now, maybe, I don't know. But I think that's another phenomenon altogether. So, okay, let's come on to another part of this discussion, which is related to India, and I'll tell you why. Now, there are certain countries who have not properly reacted to this, nor have even taken interest to react. India, of course, has given a very specific stand that it's not about the West or the Russians as far as Katsa sanctions and all of that is concerned. Although we know that for Katsa, India has already gone in for a backup option, which is to basically putting the process of transaction and acceptance of certain loans from the US government already in the back burner. So that's already happened. But and of course, yeah, one funny news: Indian Oil Corporation has already sought to buy Russian crude for 2 years. I think specific Ural crude, if I'm right. So one thing which I see is that I think the Biden administration knew about this. That if we will provoke the Ukrainians in that sense, the whole administration knew it because they are not so dumb in that. I think so. And I think the way this has gone in is that, of course, the Ukrainians have been pushed to this situation, which is terrible. But I think collaborating with the Chinese. Okay, yeah, it's audible, right? Yeah. Okay, you're mute.
I lost you for about 10 seconds there.
Sure, no problem. I'll just repeat myself for convenience. So, very specifically, so what I see is that yes, as the Russians are being subjected to this, what the Ukraine, the whole situation is from fuming up. I think the biggest losers are the Ukrainians. That's a different issue altogether. But the thing which interested me was that despite the fact that India has already taken up backup options like buying crude from Russia and managing the Katsa issue in that sense, I certainly have been saying for long that this is currently the most pro-US political consensus in India, which we will not see in a long time, precisely because at some time when Indian companies will come up, we will enter into Web3 also. It's not that we'll not enter into Web3 and we'll not limit ourselves to fiat currencies and whatnot. So we'll enter into blockchain too. We have leaders already. One of the key investors of the Coup app is very interesting guy. People can look his works. He's a crypto investor in California himself. So India will enter into Web3. India will enter into future technologies, and it will shape its Indo-Pacific vision. You talk about maritime power. You talk about strategic considerations. So that sense, I also consider that India will do, for example, in area, which is a very interesting field per se, countering investment hurdles and other things. It's just demography and other things that they are concerned. But the one thing which I found was that the Democrats knew what they're doing, but uh, the part of sabotage was that the sanctions will not affect Russia, but it would anyways would be inadvertent for India to be more forced, because I see these funky reactions, and you know who they do. The DC tankies who basically talk about various things, and they are, I mean, so nauseous to even say anything that what India is not doing anything, and why would Indian army go? Why would India do anything? It's not India's concern after all. India has its own strategic interest. India will not go for that. So, uh, 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 I usually say this very openly, that we do not understand how the US China relations affect us, or if when we do, we understand the US China dichotomy very well. I think we have tried to manage it so far in France. Minister Jaishankar met Emmanuel Macron, one of the greatest moments, I would say, in that sense, in this week, apart from the Munich conference. But I think while some may argue that China's position on Ukraine might a little bit eerily be similar to that of India's, I think the US will bargain with the Chinese anyways, because they have to protect their own country as well. They can't just go riot and do anything. They can't, and the Taiwan policy is not clear. So how do you see it? I think India can build itself. This is the right moment, because I think for a post-colonial India, one thing which I've always believed in, which I call the Moore's law of political economy, that जब यहाँ पे कुछ रिस्क होता है तभी इस देश में रिफॉर्म होता है. So this is the history of India. I mean, COVID reforms or anything we talk about, whether the 1919 or Rao reforms. So how do you see it?
That's a very nice point, because I think a very interesting lesson that we've learned today. So today, Ukraine broke diplomatic relations with Russia. This is something that I wish, our Western neighbor would do with us. I know that our country, our policymakers don't have the courage to de-recognize Pakistan. They don't have the courage to publish maps saying all of this, 1947 borders are our sovereign territory, and this is just, occupied by a rogue state. But then, if you don't have the courage to do that yourself, you don't have the imagination to do it yourself, then just provoke the other side into doing it. Or, what loss will we have? We should learn a lot from this moment. It's a very instructive moment, that if you have the willpower, it's not just about, a conventional war. That for the past 51 years, since the end of the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, India has rested on the laurels of, oh yes, we have superiority in conventional military tactics, and hence we're safe. But what have we done to stop the death by a thousand cuts? Because over that time, our neighbor also understood that, okay, they can't defeat us in a conventional war, so they became a nuclear armed state, and they adopted proxy warfare. And meanwhile, we have sat back and allowed this to happen. We've sat back and allowed the US to plant the seeds of balkanization in our country through separatism, secessionism, missionary activities. That there are now 3 or 4 active movements. There's the Khalistan movement, for secession of Punjab. There's this bizarre United States of South India, Dravidam conspiracy happening in certain evangelical circles. There's Greater Bangladesh that they're talking about, and then they want to carve out Baptist exclaves in Northeast India. Now we just sit back and watch this happen. We should be learning from other countries, and applying these lessons ourselves. This is a wonderful moment that while the world is distracted by what's happening in between Russia and Ukraine, and they have already written us off that, oh, India is A, not a democracy, and B, such an unreliable partner, and C, and Bruno Makash was saying, again this morning, he's been on this trip for God knows how long, for 1 week now. He's saying, oh, this good country, is now having its reputation go down the drain. Wonderful. I don't want a reputation. The only reputation I want is of an irrational mad dog who is capable of anything. That is what the world respects. That this is how you know Pakistan, despite being poorer than us, despite not having a strong economic base, is able to project its power in a meaningful way. Even when their prime minister is a joke. Did you see him in Moscow yesterday? He arrived in Moscow. He's walking down the red carpet at the airport. They sent the deputy foreign minister, to pick him up, and he's just being like, "Wow, it's such a great moment to be here. I've watched
He
Putin
said,
on TV.
yeah, he said, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's
He's
such an
excited.
exciting time to be here."
Such an
And even his
exciting time.
Russian host is like, "Yes, yes, you picked an interesting time to come." It's so cringe. Yet fully capable of projecting their power, getting their messages heard in DC, in London, getting their messages whitewashed by Western academia, by the BBC, by CNN, by the New York Times. So clearly, there's something we can learn. You can learn even from your adversaries. So instead of being the victims of balkanization, we should be out there fomenting balkanization of our adversaries. Uh, we should be using the lessons learned here to understand how to achieve our geopolitical objectives. That there's many imaginative ways to salami slice. We're the victims of Chinese salami slices. Have we ever tried salami tactics? We don't need to go, declare war on our enemy, because we're liberating Bangladesh again. Nobody does that anymore. You do proxy wars, you do salami slices, and then you count, through brinkmanship, that the others won't risk a full escalation and will be forced to compromise. So you bring a gun to the table and you extract compromises and concessions out of them. So there's various things that are now on the table, and there's a golden opportunity now to make hay while the sun shines. They already hate us. They made that clear. They're already preoccupied with another thing. Look at it this way. So Arif Ajakia, Pakistani exile, he says that if the roles were reversed, if Pakistan had 1.3 billion people and India had 300 million and was at the edge of the subcontinent, then there would not be an India because they would overrun it, because they understand their purpose. They understand, what they need to do to guarantee their security. The question is, do we? And then people are like, oh, what are you trying to create? You're creating a Hindu Pakistan. Yes, we didn't create the Hindu Pakistan. Gandhi, Nehru, Mountbatten, and Jinnah created two equal countries that are equal in sovereignty, equal in morality. It doesn't matter what we do. You know, I don't see it as a bad thing if you say, oh, you're just as bad as Pakistan. Yes, you have to be as bad as your neighbors. We don't have the luxury of being like Japan or the UK, surrounded by a great wall of water called the sea, that we can be like, oh yes, yes, we're great pacifists. You have to deal with reciprocity. That it's a basic function of international relations and foreign policy is reciprocity.
Okay, so now I'll get to certain propositions in my report, which I wish to share, and then we'll talk about Dharmic Marxism in conclusion. So I have been observing the trends, and to be fair, I look at the role of state actors and non-state actors equally. I see that there are non-state actors who are doing. Not everyone is an outpost, but that's a different question altogether, a different question or a different point altogether. But uh, people generally say that it's non-alignment 2.0. I completely disagree. I say no, it's not, simply because I think that's happening due to what India said it's doing, which is multi-alignment, and it's proving day by day that issue-based coalitions, issue-based solutions are somewhere down the line better for a country like India. Not just because we have to, you know, I would say, wring out the problematic fault lines which have already affected us for long, but also to ensure that we carve out the world in a proper way. And there are things which should be done because we have a problem of following or doing certain things in hindsight which we don't even realize we do. And then we by mistake, create those norms and then perpetuate and appreciate them very funnily. So, my proposition has been that I think in the coming decades, I don't know, India might not need a network of quote unquote alliances in that NATO-ish sense or the ASEAN EU sense or the funny SARC-ish sense. I don't like
Mhm.
SARC. I think SARC is a joke. IORA is better. ISA is better, but not the SARC. So I think a multi-aligned neutral power is something which is what India is doing because that's what the trend is. It's not about um, you know the bonhomie of certain people in the strategic circle, whether law, technology, international affairs, and others, with the American entities. I remember this very interesting tweet by Dhruv Shankar. He says, "Oh, American companies are involved with Indian entities and Indian government, and not the White House. That is the State Department and the White House with the Indian government," which of course is of course funny. You know why? But I think the only way to engage with others properly and keep our strategic momentum ahead, because we have to do a lot of strategic hedging in that regard. We are yet to see how Iran responds to the JCPOA. Iran has already made it clear to the US that, you know what, we'll only come back if you are going to make the terms better. So that's why I have been thinking that for a multipolar world, which many people say that, while we are in a post G2 world right now, or still the wounds of the G2 that was created when Europe was partially just subordinated by the Americans, the US China G2, we're still seeing how it is healing. It's just that the asymmetry has not begun yet so much, but the seeds have been sown already by the Americans and to some extent the Chinese and the Russians. So I've been thinking that a neutral multi-aligned power can actually do a well in a multipolar world because we always forget that globalization in the real politics also is multipolar. It seems unipolar because, oh, you know what, that is how teaching is done. But sorry, if you have read international relations in that way, you means people, of course not you, then that is not an appropriate way to do so. But yeah, I think that is why I think that there should be a multi-aligned neutral power. And yeah, issue-based coalitions and strategic hedging. What do you think about it?
Absolutely. Even this collective security doctrine, these traditional alliance structures are very rarely come into use. Again, they're about perception management. It's about deterrence. That why does NATO have so many members? Because I mean, each member they take is a liability. Because an attack against one member is supposed to be an attack against all members, according to Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Um, Now, with that in mind, uh, they know, they have no interest in defending most of their members. They just do it because there's an illusion of strength that, oh, look, we're a big bloc. And if you attack one of us, then all of us will take retaliative measures. And that's where the power of NATO resides, or it resides in bullying non-aligned countries like Serbia in the late 90s, well, Yugoslavia at the time, or Libya in this century. Now, I don't see any scenario where anyone wants India as a collective security partner. They don't see India as a reliable ally, and India doesn't see anyone else as a reliable defense ally because in the subcontinent we're more or less isolated. Even if we had a treaty of collective defense with Russia or with France, the two countries that we're supposedly closest to, they can't send ground troops to defend us if we're attacked in a conventional war. And they're not going to nuke our adversaries if we, face a nuclear war either. They're going to call for calm and de-escalation and restraint, even if they're defense allies. The only value in it is the illusion before the war has broken out that, oh, I shouldn't do this because, oh, Russia or France might come on their side. But it's unrealistic to expect that. Similarly, I don't see countries in Southeast Asia being particularly interested in a defense pact with India, because at the end of the day, India is not clear on its strategic vision and is not seen as a reliable ally because we barely enforce our existing laws domestically. We haven't defined our own interests. How are we supposed to pursue them? You lack the state capacity, you lack the willpower, you lack the vision, lack the imagination. So you're just a status quo power that exists, and things happen to you passively. That, oh no, I'm being balkanized. What do? I'm going to sit on my hands. My entire state apparatus is infiltrated by Pakistani agents, by Western agents, by Chinese agents. What am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to expose them. Who exposes them? That's not your job. You have to do something about it. Now, as a result, India is a low value partner, uh, the way it's seen to other countries. So, for that, we have to be more clear in what our goals are, what our interests are, and start pursuing them. Power respects power. It doesn't respect, your morality. That it doesn't matter how much we say that, oh, we have the moral high ground on this, or we've taken a principled stand on that. Morals and principles and values in international affairs are like clothes that you put on and discard as the seasons change, but your goals remain the same. So this is something that's important for us, and that's why uh, there's no point pursuing collective defense treaties with others until we've demonstrated that we have power, that we have hard power and soft power, and know and understand how to deploy them. So until that point, as you mentioned, issues based partnerships is much more effective, where you have a clear goal. Like with the Pentagram, the clear goal is to contain the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood through its proxies in Qatar and Turkey, maybe Malaysia. Very good. That brings you together. You're an eclectic bunch, but you have a common goal. You stick to that common goal without turning it into some sort of grand alliance and getting sucked into Yemen by accident or getting sucked into Cyprus by accident. Now, similarly, this is where we can explore unconventional alliances or partnerships or coalitions. Now, one such thing could be, as we deepen our engagement in Southeast Asia, then we can offer hopefully defense exports in the future, and that is an indication that we're becoming a more reliable partner. That we have an indigenous defense industry, and we export it, and with it, like I mentioned with France earlier, when you buy our products, with it comes some sort of security umbrella that now you're one of us. That's what NATO does as well. One of the criteria of becoming NATO is to commit to only buying American or Western defense goods. And that's the quid pro quo, that, oh, you join NATO and you support the US military industrial complex, and we'll pretend to support you, when you're in danger. That's the social contract, so to speak, of NATO. So that's something that defense and indigenization would help with doing in that sort of power projection. And then our other interests, issue based, we're still with issue based coalitions or partnerships, we're still a bit too passive, reactive. We wait for things to happen and then decide how we're supposed to approach it. We should be preempting it. We should be looking, oh, in 10 years, 20 years, will Iran still be a theocracy, or will it be some new form of state? If so, have a plan that in that case, tie up with Iran and squeeze the country that's between us and them. In the future, if Taiwan falls to the People's Republic of China, what does that mean for us? And not, oh, what are we going to say at the UN? What are we going to learn from this experience and apply at home? Similarly, if we had had this vision before, and we had known that, oh, at some point Russia is going to take the following steps. They're going to recognize breakaway republics, be invited as peacekeepers by the administrations in these republics. Then what we should have had is, okay, we know this is going to happen. When this happens, it's a golden opportunity for us to take Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir using the same model. It's our perfect opportunity to take Amarkot and Tharparkar districts in Sindh and reabsorb them. You have to have that level of strategic thinking. You have to anticipate what other countries are going to do, and not just be like, oh, when this happens, we're going to give X statement or Y statement copy pasted from dozens of other statements from the Nehruvian era. It's about what is this opportunity? What does this mean to us? And how can we learn from it? How can we take advantage of the situation? And we still don't have that level of cunning in our foreign policy, because we don't have goals, we don't have clear interests apart from status quo, that, oh, the way things are the way they should be. That needs to be changed. And if that means if we don't change it ourselves, then either you provoke others into doing it and then we're forced into changing, or you wait until a hostile power comes and intervenes and changes things, changes the status quo against your will and without your consent. So that's what we need to learn from this experience. It's a shame right now that the Indian policy making elite, in other countries, over 2 years of Corona was a golden opportunity. They did whatever they wanted, knowing that this was a golden time to push through new laws, to push through new policies. India, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. That, oh, we can't rock the boat because Corona is such a sensitive time, that you're learning the wrong lessons. Don't listen to what other countries say. Watch what they do and learn from that. Similarly, during this conflict in Eastern Europe right now, uh, instead of now being like, oh, we're so moral, learn from it. Do what's needed.
Yeah. I'll say, however, in a tiny disagreement, that I think in terms of financial policy, we have done really well. It's just that I think we are not spending well, which is another issue. But on foreign policy, I completely 100% agree. That's a different issue altogether. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up. But I just have one remark to make for fun. We'll see how the Taliban TTP Pakistani army relationship will transform with time. That's the sight to behold also. While Imran Khan is off for vacations in Russia, so-called
And is
excited
now stuck
vacations.
there.
Yeah, he's also stuck there, and he's saying, "Yare, main to excited hu." So please be excited. And I think as the Wazir Azam sir does it. I mean, congratulations to him. But I'll see how the circle of this relationship in Afghanistan goes ahead, because that's where I find the spiral interesting, how India will counter that portion accordingly for securing Kashmir, because that's again a different question altogether. We can discuss it. And we'll try to have a trialogue on Dharmic Marxism again. So I'll try to bring Alexei, and then we'll deep dive into Dharmic Marxism. Till
Mhm.
then, viewers, thank you so much. And we are
If you
done
like,
with this.
I still have 5 minutes. You can
Hmm.
ask one question about it, and
Okay,
we
so
can
just one quick question. One quick
yeah.
question.
Mhm.
Marxism, as I understand, is a linear policy in understanding civilizations and the growth of a polity, correct? Now, Alexei admits that dharmic Marxism is something which is quite different, which is about uh, having some linear policies with a dharmic outlook or an Indic or an Indian outlook. We have people like Satyabhakta.
Mhm.
So, how do you counter the revisionist tendency of having a linear policy, because you also know that Marxism came from the West, and the Dharmic Marxism has to ensure that the continuous nature of the Indian civilization, as far as policy is concerned, is not affected. And we are, if we say, if somebody is interested in it, coming up with a policy understanding on any issue, how will he go ahead? Just 3 minutes, maybe? Yeah.
Sure. So, first of all, Marxism is not an ideology, it's a set of tools with which we understand socioeconomic changes. So, essentially, what it boils down to is the foundation of everything that we call culture, religion, politics, economy, society is at the end of the day decided by economic relations between people. That's the foundation. Everything else is a superstructure, and that foundation is the mode of production. And in classical Marxist historiography, they say that human societies go from the, let's say, early, village communist mode of production, or village socialist mode of production, where everyone gets along and cooperates at the village level. Then a slavery mode of production, feudal mode of production, capitalist mode of production, and then communist mode of production again, where there's a sense of inevitability that each of these uh, collapse based on their own inherent inequalities, and the superstructure collapses, and then a new one is formed. A new form of economic organization is formed. Now, Satya Bhakta, when he wrote about his understanding, his indigenization of these tools, not the ideology, but the tools, he said that this is akin to the Indian understanding of cyclical history, that it doesn't need to be linear. This is about, this is like our yugs, that, there's a yug, at the end of the yug, there's a pralay, there's a collapse, there's an end of the world, and there's this creative destruction that takes place, and a new yuga is born with a new basis of society. The way humans interact with each other changes in these yugs. So that is not, so it's not incompatible with the Indian understanding of history, with the Indian understanding of time or of social relations. What is unfortunate is that there are a lot of, let's say, party led revisionist communists in India who are not interested in using the tools of analysis that Marx wrote about to understand society and understand that you have to go through various levels of material prosperity or capital accumulation, or different modes of production in order to reach your goal, but rather they are what you call Marxist Leninists. So Lenin, said that, oh, you have to accelerate using a vanguard party, that you can't just wait for pralay, you have to make it happen by leading the proletariat, and the proletariat is not ready, so intellectuals create a party and pull the proletariat forward and use them as their street power. That's been used to create very thuggish movements within India. And then you have Maoists who believe in the proletarianization of the peasantry, that you have to create a people's war by radicalizing not the urban working class, not the proletariat, by taking farmers, radicalizing them, arming them, and then marching to take over the state. Now, neither of these are adapted to Indian economic or social or cultural specificities. And as a result, they've met with very limited success. And what these parties are, what these leaders are essentially uh, the unofficial embassies of other countries and their parties. There was even, bizarrely, an Albanian tendency in India. Yeah, Albania was such a poor country, closed off from the world, but they still had enough money to by a few Indian politicians who were like, yes, yes, we're the pure Marxists in the 60s and 70s. That's how open they were to being bought and sold and hired. Now, so what we need, yeah, I think there's a big consensus within India for a social welfare system, uh, for a polity that looks after the upliftment of people, gives them dignity, pulls them out of poverty. That's a very pressing concern for a lot of people. The conflict arises over what the best method is for it, whether we need to go through capitalism to achieve socialism, whether we can build socialism on top of feudalism. That was the Nehruvian system, did not really work well, because when you have a post colonial society that has been mentally colonized, which has been stripped of its wealth, stripped of its dignity, and suffers from great poverty and inequality, then one of your key objectives is to lift people out of poverty so that they have the social and economic capital to make their own decisions, to have dignity, to have agency again. Now, that is a motivating factor among voters. A lot of voters vote for access to government services, for access to jobs, for access to, the police. So, for example, in our state, in Uttar Pradesh, why is it that certain communities vote for certain parties? They say, which are completely identitarian. So, for example, the Yadav community says that, oh, when there's Samajwadi Party rule, I can go to the police station, and instead of beating me up, the police station listens to me, the police officers listen to me, and they do what my community wants them to do. So people are voting for access. A modern state would be neutral on this. It wouldn't be patronage based, that, oh, when I'm in power, then my clansmen will get preferential treatment from state institutions. You shouldn't be scared of going to the police in the first place. They're here to serve you. You shouldn't be scared of going to the courts. They're here to serve you. If they're not serving you, if you're scared of the state, then that is a failure of the state, and it's a failure of accessibility. So, essentially, what it comes down to is that if we are to have uh, a state that delivers on people's aspirations, that they want dignity, they want poverty uplift, they want to be uplifted from poverty, they want agency, then there needs to be a movement which roots this in their culture and in their aspirations, rather than being a cheap copy and paste of, it can be, of Chinese communism, or a cheap copy and paste of Soviet communism, or a cheap copy and paste of Western liberalism, like our constitution. None of these are suited to India. None of them actually work on the grassroots. So, of course, we should invest some intellectual energy and capacity into developing our own understanding of what socialism is or should be. It can be Sarvodaya, it can be Antyodaya, it can be the Lohiite tendency without the casteist SP brand of politics. But I think it's inevitable that at some point, a uniquely Indian political philosophy of social welfare policies, plus being rooted in the dharmic roots of Indian culture, philosophy, and society, will arise and will come to preeminent uh, positions within our policymaking.
Yeah, I think a good mobilization of Purushartha itself, the four stump of Purushartha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, would be something very interesting to see forth. And I think I know one expert who very well discusses it, that which is who is G. Vishwa Kumarji. But yeah, I think we really had an interesting discussion, and I think, as I was saying, I was right. We need a trialogue on dharmic Marxism, but we'll discuss certain aspects of how we see governance in polity. And I think, as we see the role of collaborative governance also with cooperative societies, as this Ministry of Cooperation has come in, we are
Mhm.
still yet to see. I agree that the government has not come up with a boom package on what it wants to do, but we are yet to see. So I'll conclude because I just need your 2 minutes after the session. But thank you so much, viewers. I think this was a surprise question I wish to ask, so I did. And gear up at 7 p.m. as I will discuss the 10-point plan to sorry, not to deindustrialize, but to industrialize India.
Yeah,
I don't know why this.
we don't need help in deindustrializing ourselves.
I agree. And by mistake, I said deindustrialize, so I apologize to the viewers. But so a 10-point plan to industrialize India. This de-dollarization and deindustrialization. Oh my god, so funny. Anyways, so see me at 7 p.m. for in this thing. Like, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Namaste.